The great street ran straight from one end of the city to the other, wide enough for 8 carts abreast, and at this hour there was not one cart on it. It went from the eastern gate to the western gate without a single bend, a mile and more of paving laid edge to edge, with colonnades down both sides and covered walkways behind the columns where the shops were, all shuttered now. The stone underfoot still held the day's heat and gave it back slowly, the way the whole city did, so that a man walking barefoot down the middle of it would have felt the warmth come up through his soles, as if the ground were only sleeping. Here and there a lamp had been left burning in a niche beside a doorway, flat and closed and shaped like a little boat, with a flame no bigger than a thumbnail, and the plaster above each one was black with the soot of many such nights. The light did not travel. It lay on a threshold, and on the first step, and on a hand's width of paving, and beyond that the street was the colour of deep water. Far down toward the sea, where this street crossed the other great one at the heart of the city, a single point of fire hung much higher than any lamp, out over the harbour, steady and small and very bright, and it did not belong to any house. Off the main street, behind a long plain wall, lay the quarter the kings had built for the men who did nothing but think. It was a set of quiet buildings around gardens and covered walks, with a great dining hall where the scholars ate at the city's expense and argued late, and long rooms where the scrolls were kept. There were fewer of the scrolls now than there had once been, and the men who worked among them knew it and spoke of it the way people speak of a fortune the family used to have. Fire and war and simple neglect had each taken their share over the years, but the reading rooms were not empty of them. They lay on their sides in cases along the walls, each with a little tag hanging from the end of the roll, and a man could still come here and ask for a work 300 years old and have it brought to him. In one of the rooms a single lamp burned, and a copyist had fallen asleep over his work with his head on his arm. The sheet in front of him was half filled with even lines, and the reed pen had rolled from his fingers, and the ink had dried on its tip. Around him, in the dark, the shelves went up out of the lamplight, rank above rank, holding everything anyone in the room had ever known, and a great deal that no one living knew any longer. In the old royal quarter near the water, there was a place people still came to see, though the kings who built it were 400 years gone. It stood at a crossing of 2 streets under its own low dome, and a stair went down from the street into a chamber below. And there a man lay in a coffin of clear stone through which he could be seen. He had been a young man when he died, and they had kept him young. He lay as if he had lain down an hour before, in the plain dress of a soldier, and the lamplight came through the stone and moved on his face when the flame moved. He had walked from this coast to the edge of the world, and turned around only because his own men would go no further. And he had meant to be buried in a desert temple far to the west, and instead he had been brought here, to the city he had ordered built and never seen finished. And here he had stayed while everything he made fell to other men. A single attendant sat on a stool at the foot of the coffin with a taper and a book of names, and now and then, out of long habit, he trimmed the wick of the lamp so that the light on the dead face never quite failed.
Back from the water, the houses stood close together up the gentle rise, showing the street almost nothing. A blank wall, a narrow door, no windows low down. Each one turned its face inward onto a small courtyard open to the sky, with columns round it and a floor of stone or mosaic. And every room looked into that. The best rooms were lined to the height of a man with thin sheets of coloured stone cut from one block and opened out so the veins ran mirrored across the joins. And above that, the plaster was painted with slim reeds and small birds and long panels of dark red. In one such courtyard, a shallow basin held a hand's depth of water, and the water was black, and in it lay a single small square of stars. A child stepped in the room off the court, with the door curtain looped back for the air, and on the wall beside the bed, a painted heron stood in painted reeds, and had stood there since before the child was born, and would go on standing there long after. Somewhere in the house, an old woman was awake and moving very quietly, as the old are in the night, and the sound of her bare feet on the mosaic was the only sound in the place. And then that too stopped, and the house was as still as the water in the basin. Down at the edge of the Great Harbour, the ground opened out and the buildings of the kings ran along the water. Porticos and terraces and a small palace built out on a spit of rock, where a queen had once shut herself up to wait for news that did not come. In front of one of the temples, 2 needles of red stone stood up against the sky, taller than the roof behind them, cut and carved 1,500 years before in a country far up the river, and brought down and set here to honor a man who had made himself a god. By day, their surfaces were covered from base to tip with the tight little pictures of that older writing, birds and eyes and folded cloth and water, and no one in the city could read a line of it anymore. At night, they were 2 black shapes and nothing else. The harbour water lay flat between the moles, and the moored ships stood on it without a tremor, their yards down and lashed, their high sterns dark, and between the hulls the black water gave back the shapes of them exactly. A watchman on the sea wall leaned on the parapet and looked, as men on that wall had always looked, toward the light that hung out over the entrance of the harbour, and the light looked back at him and did not blink. A long, low causeway ran out from the shore to the island that closed the harbour off from the open sea. 7 furlongs of made ground, with the road along the top of it, and it divided the water into 2. The Great Harbour on the one hand, where the ships from across the sea came in, and on the other a second harbour with a name that meant the Harbour of Safe Return. Arches had been left in the causeway low down, so the water could pass through from one side to the other, and the sea moved back and forth in them all night, with a slow suck and slap that never stopped. A man walking out along the causeway in the dark walked between 2 darknesses of water, the harbour on his left going quietly about its business among the ships, and on his right the outer basin open toward the channel and the reed flats and the sea. Ahead of him the ground rose to the island, and on the point of the island the thing he was walking toward stood up into the night,
and it grew as he came on, not brighter but larger, until it filled the sky in front of him, and the fire at the top of it was no longer a star, but a hearth. The tower on the island was the tallest thing that stood on any coast in the world, and only one work of men, far up the river in the old country of the tombs, was said to stand higher. It went up in 3 stages, a great square base, and above that an 8-sided drum, and above that a round turret, each one set back from the one below, so that from far out at sea it stood against the sky like a thing narrowing to a point. A ramp wound up inside the base, broad enough for a donkey with panniers. And all night the fuel went up it, wood and dry dung and whatever would burn, hauled up on the backs of animals and men to the platform at the top where the fire was kept. Up there the men who tended it worked in the heat and the roar of it, with cloths over their faces, feeding it and raking it, and never letting it sink. And behind the flame stood a great disk of polished metal that threw the light out over the water. Sailors 30 miles out, who could see no land at all, could see that fire low on the horizon and know the coast was there, and steer for it, and know also to steer wide, because the coast it marked was a coast of hidden reefs that had taken ships since before the city had a name. All night it burned. It had not gone out in 400 years. Behind the city, on the side away from the sea, lay the lake. It was larger than the harbour and busier by day, for the goods of the whole country came down to it by canal from the river, the wine and the grain and the papyrus and the stone. And its own harbour was often more crowded than the one that faced the sea. At night it lay still and enormous under a low mist, and the reed beds went out from its edges for a great distance, papyrus standing in black ranks, with their feathered heads just showing against the paler water. Flat barges lay moored among the reeds with their poles shipped, and the men who worked them slept aboard under sacking. The birds slept out there in numbers nobody had ever counted, ducks and coots in their thousands, and geese down from the north, and pelicans riding in rafts far out, and the tall herons standing one-legged in the shallows with their necks folded back. Now and then, far off, one of them made a sound that carried over the flat water and was answered from further off still. Fish moved in the channels and left rings that spread and flattened and were gone. The whole flooded country breathed slowly in the dark and gave off the smell of water and mud and green stalks. And beyond it, invisible, the river went on doing the thing it had done for longer than there had been a city to receive it. On its own low hill at the landward edge of the city stood the greatest of the temples, raised to the god the first of the kings had made, a god put together on purpose out of older gods, given a Greek face and an Egyptian meaning, a god of the grain and the dead and the healing of the sick, so that everyone in that mixed city could find something of their own in him. The temple stood high on a platform reached by a long flight of steps, colonnaded all around, and within it a second set of rooms held books, as the king's great library had once held them. A daughter of that library kept here on the hill. The god's image sat in the dark of the inner hall, colossal, seated, with the measure of grain on his head, and a single lamp burned before it. Along the colonnade outside, people slept who had come to the god to be healed. They lay on their own bedding in the shelter of the columns and waited for him to come to them in a dream and tell them what to do. And the priests would read the dreams in the morning. A man walked the length of the portico and back, not watching them, only walking, and his footsteps came down off the coffered ceiling far above with a hollow, generous sound, and none of the sleepers stirred. The story the whole country told, and had told for longer than the country could remember, began with a king who was also a god, and who was loved. He had come down among people when they were living no better than animals, and he had taught them how to grow grain, how to press the grape, what the gods were owed, and how to give it. And he had gone through the world doing this, not by force, but by music and persuasion, and the world had grown gentle under his hand. He had a brother, and the brother could not bear it. So the brother made a chest, beautiful, exactly to the measure of the loved king's body, though no one knew that was why. And at a feast he brought it in and said, lightly, as a game, that whoever fit it should have it. And one after another, the guests lay down in it, and were too short or too tall, and laughed. And at last the king himself lay down in it, and fit it as a body fits its grave. And in that moment the lid was thrown down, and nailed, and sealed with molten lead. And the chest was carried out into the dark, and thrown into the river. And the river took it down to the sea. His wife was also his sister, and she was a goddess. And when she heard, she cut her hair and put on the dress of mourning and went to look for him. There is no part of that search that is quick. She went down the river and along the shore and over the sea, asking everyone, asking children, and it was children who told her in the end, for they had seen the chest go by on the water. It had come ashore in a far country, and a tree had grown up around it and closed it inside its trunk. And a king of that country had cut the tree for a pillar of his hall without knowing what was in it, so that the dead god stood holding up a stranger's roof. She went there and served in that house as a nurse, unknown, until she could ask for the pillar. And they gave it to her. And she took the chest out of the wood and brought it home by ship, and hid it in the reeds of the marsh while she went to see her son. But the brother was out hunting by moonlight in that same marsh, and he found it. And this time he did not sink it. He opened it and cut the body into 14 pieces, and threw them the length and breadth of the land, so that there should be nothing left to find and nothing left to bury. So she began again. She went up and down the whole river in a boat made of papyrus, through the marshes and the channels and the flooded fields, and wherever she found a piece of him she stopped, and there she built a shrine and buried it and left the place holy, so that in the end there was no district of the country that did not hold a part of him and did not keep his festival. She gathered them all but one, which the river had given to its fish, and for that one she made a likeness, and it did as well. And when she had gathered him, she bent over him and beat her wings, for a goddess in that country could be a bird when she chose, and breathed into him what breath she had, and he woke, not to live again in the ordinary way, but enough to father a child, and to go down and be king of the dead, which is why in that country the dead were not simply gone. Every year when the star came back and the river rose and covered the land and drew back and left it black and rich and ready, the people said it was her grief and her joy that did it, her weeping that swelled the river, and her finding him that made it fall. And they went down to the water and set little boats of light adrift on it, and let them go, and watched them go. And this the country had done for longer than it had done anything else at all. In the old quarter under the Temple Hill, where the streets were narrow and turned, and the people were mostly of the older kind, a few workrooms kept alight. The glass blowers worked at night, when the heat was easier to bear, and through an open door a furnace glowed a deep, even red, and a man turned a rod at the end of which a bud of glass swelled and lengthened and took a shape, gold in the firelight, and the breath he blew into it could be seen by no one. On a shelf behind him stood the day's work, cups and small bottles for perfume and for medicine, cooling in the dark. Next door, a maker of paper had his sheets pressed under boards and stones. The split reed laid crosswise and beaten and dried, and the smell of the river came off them still. And in the next street, the bakery was awake, as it was every night, the mill turning with a low grinding note that came up through the paving, the oven drawn back to its glowing edges, the round loaves going in on a long peel. For an hour before light, that whole street would smell of new bread, and the people asleep above it would turn over and be glad in their sleep without knowing why. Along the seaward harbour, the great granaries stood in a row, long and windowless and thick-walled, and they were full. All the summer the grain had come down the river to the lake and across to the sea harbour and into these buildings. And all the summer the ships had carried it away north across the sea to feed a city that could not feed itself, a city so far off that most of the men who grew the grain would never see it and did not much think about it. The sailing season was near its end now. In a few weeks the sea would close for the winter, and no ship would put out until the spring. So the last of the great grain ships lay at the quay, taking on their last loads by lamplight, broad and deep and clumsy, the biggest things that moved on the water anywhere. And gangs of men went up the planks, bent under the sacks, in a slow, endless line, and came down empty and went up again. They would sail with the first fair wind and run for the north while the weather held. And behind them, the granaries would stand half empty through the winter and fill again when the river rose. A tally clerk sat at the foot of a gangway with a lamp and a board, marking each load as it passed, and his lips moved, and he did not look up. High in the quiet quarter, where the men of the Museion lived, one window still held a light. An old man sat at it who had spent his life measuring the sky, and he sat now with a bronze instrument on the sill in front of him and a sheet of numbers under his hand, and he was not working so much as looking. He had drawn the paths of the wandering stars and named the fixed ones, and set the whole of it down in tables that men would use for 1,000 years without knowing the name of the man who made them. And he knew that the earth stood still at the centre of it all, and that everything else turned about the earth, and he was wrong about that, and it made no difference to the beauty of what he saw. Below his window the city fell away dark to the harbour and the fire on the island, and above it the sky was open from edge to edge, and he sat in the doorway between the two and put down, now and then, a single figure, and rested his hand and looked again.
Before the light, there was an hour when the sky changed and nothing else did. The great hunter had climbed through the whole of the night and stood now in the south, west of the meridian, and beginning to sink. The 3 stars of his belt in a short, even line. And below the belt and following it, 1 star burned harder than anything else in the heavens, white and high. The star the country watched for. The star whose rising in high summer had each year called up the flood. And very low in the same quarter of the sky, skimming along above the flat, dark land, and never climbing more than a hand's breadth above it, a single great star stood by itself and shook in the thick air near the ground. The sailors steered by it, and it shared its name with the town at the mouth of the Western Channel. In the east, above the flat black land, the sky went from black to a colour that was not yet grey. The stars there did not vanish so much as grow unsure, one after another, in no order. Out on the lake the birds began before there was anything to see. 1 crane far off, and then another answering, and then the whole flooded country, waking in a long, spreading murmur that had no single source. The mist began to lift off the water in sheets. In the streets, the little lamps in their niches guttered and burned blue and went out one by one, and nobody saw them go. And out on the island, the great fire was fed for the last time before the day. And the men at the top of the tower stood back from it and looked east and waited, as they did every morning, for the moment when the sky would be brighter than their fire and they could let it fall.